The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, welcome back to Harborough once again. Now yesterday we saw the tiny little settlement of Cold Newton and we learned a lot about its medieval history and how it moved places, not just once but twice. And we walked through that field full of horses' hooves over the old, fantastic by the way, earthworks. Now this place, which is its neighbour, has got its own earthworks. You can see them here in this field. Possibly. They're not very well pronounced, not as pronounced as the ones in Cold Newton anyway. But really the earthworks here aren't the main story. The main thing I'm interested in this place is actually in that kind of direction over there, because there's a massive hall which a lot of people will probably not know because it's kind of hidden and secluded away from everything, but you'll definitely know who once lived in it. Let's go and have a look at it. This is the parish of Lowesby. Lowesby, Lawsey's farm. Rounding off the week in Harborough, we have the parish of Lowesby, and like yesterday, we're still in the area known as High Leicestershire, to some. Lowesby is located 500 feet above sea level in a relatively hilly region. Other than Queniborough Brook, there are no other sites of topographic interest in Lowesby, partially due to intensive farming around here. Local farming may have been influenced by the geology of the area, which is predominantly Lower Jurassic mudstones and minor carbonates. In any event, farming is definitely not the most important part of Lowesby Parish. I'll tell you what is though, Lowesby Hall. First owned by Richard Wollaston from the mid-17th century, Lowesby Hall remained in his family until Anne Wollaston married into the Folk family, and then the building would remain with them until well into the 20th century. Its current owner is a multi-millionaire who you will at least know by name because he had a massive role to play in the UK's house building sector. More on him in a bit. Speaking of names, Lowesby is Old Norse and simply means Lawsey's farm. At the time of Doomsday, the manor was held by Countess Judith, a niece of William the Conqueror, and then Hugh Burdett, who would make it his seat for many generations. It was the Burdetts who founded the church here in Lowesby, although their association with the religious aspect of the village wasn't without a bit of controversy. Lowesby is also known for its old railway station, which was actually more convenient for residents of Tilton-on-the-Hill, which is a bit strange, but let's get going and see exactly what their reasons were. Our main walk through Lowesby will take us from east to west along its one main street, relatively lengthy for a small village. Even though we're deep in the countryside here, farming is not the main occupation in Lowesby, but it used to be. In 1831, agriculture was by far and away the most prominent industry, with 64% of the male population employed in the sector. However, 50 years later, this number had dropped to 40%, and whilst agriculture was still the most common employment, the remainder of the population was working in other occupations, including machinists, coachmen, or gardeners. The latter two of those would have been related to the biggest property this place has, Lowesby Hall. Now, just 9% of the population work in agriculture, and the manor no longer provides employment. That means residents of this village today work elsewhere for the most part, so owning a car out here is very much a necessity. The population of the place is tiny now, but again, this was something that used to be wildly different. Before the mid-1800s, Lowesby had quite a sizable number of residents. It's believed, thanks to the coming of the railways, the population declined, as all of a sudden, people could travel much further and much quicker, and many moved away. The population never recovered, and Lowesby has averaged approximately 100 inhabitants during the 20th century. There are no shops, pubs, or schools in Lowesby, but the place does have a church. It was founded by the Burdett family, but not without a bit of controversy. When the Burdetts founded the church, they gave the right to appoint its priest to the Order of St Lazarus, based at Burton Lazars near Melton Mowbray. They supported the order for many generations until relations between the two turned sour in 1290. That's when the order started to appropriate part of the parish's tithes. This led to riots breaking out over the following years, and Lowesby's vicar was excommunicated. There was even some bloodshed in this very churchyard by Sir William Burdett in 1297, although what exactly happened is open to debate. Gradually, calm was restored, and in 1298 Sir William agreed to pay for the reconsecration of the church and reconfirmed his family's grants to the order. The relations, though, were never the same again. So within the space of about 5 minutes, I've walked from one end of Lowesby to the other. That's how small this is as a village. But it is a village because it has a church, and that is currently behind the camera. We will take a look at that in a moment. Behind me there is Lowesby's old school, and this road that runs between the two of them runs down towards Lowesby Hall. Now, it's a private road, but there is a path that runs through the churchyard and actually comes out on this road further along it. So I'm hoping to see some good shots of the hall from there, because it is a very impressive building. Let's check out the church first, though. There we go, through the lit gate, and let's have a look. So let's take a look at the church. It's dedicated to All Saints, and according to one man's account I found about it, this is kept locked. In fact, it's done up tighter than a nun's you-know-what. Built in the 13th century with 15th century improvements and a Victorian restoration in around 1868, the best bits of this are actually on the outside. It's noted for its many gargoyles, which are dotted around the building. The church offers an almost exclusively perpendicular look. Almost all of the windows are in that style. The chancel has a frieze on all three of its sides and battlemented parapets in the fancy double chamfered style we've seen at other churches in the past. The west tower too is battlemented, but in a more basic design. The north aisle has carvings in the style of Lawrence of Leicester. Curiously, although the south aisle has identical parapets, it has no cornice frieze. The same is true of the clerestory. Okay, so from the churchyard you can actually see Lowesby Hall. There's a gate here, but this is a private entrance to the hall, and all the buildings you can see sort of over here all belong to it. The hall itself is just about visible, just there. At the end of this house here, you can see part of the hall there. Now, I'm hoping to see quite a lot more of the hall in a moment. I don't know what to expect from this though. There is a public footpath, like I said, that runs out of this churchyard up here, and it turns left onto the road which we saw a moment ago at the lit gate. I'm going to follow this footpath and hopefully I'll be able to see Lowesby Hall. We'll see though. Before we get into Lowesby Hall and its history, I want to preface this next section with a couple of things. First of all, the maps I use, although generally accurate, are sometimes not totally clear. From the one I was using, it looked as though the public footpath runs along the road, which is why I was saying just there that it does. It doesn't. Instead, it loops around Lowesby Hall, hugging the edge of the hall's entrance drive, and in between there's a wooden fence. Once the hall comes into view, the fence is joined by a low wall, no more than a few centimetres tall, and there's a shallow ditch between them. Lowesby Hall is not obscured by trees, bushes, or any tall man-made structures. From the footpath you have the clearest of clear views of the hall and its associated buildings. Provided you stick to the public right-of-way, which I did, passing the hall and admiring its wonderful features is a breeze. Filming it is also not illegal. You're on a public right-of-way. I've used that fact to my advantage countless times across the 4.5 years I've been doing this, and it's allowed me to show you some quite amazing things. Now, despite that, being on the footpath also means that from the hall, whoever may be within its grounds can also see you in full view. In itself, that's not an issue, but because I was seen, I was questioned heavily by them about my intentions. As a result of those interactions, I have greatly trimmed down the footage from this next section. Only 4 shots survive from what I originally filmed, but all 4 still show Lowesby Hall. The rest of the section I've padded out using pictures from the internet. Let's get to it. Lowesby Hall is a large Grade 2 listed Georgian mansion and a famous fox hunting seat in the heart of Corn Country. The building was immortalised in a poem called Lowesby Hall by the Victorian English fox hunting MP William Bromley Davenport. It was a parody of Alfred Tennyson's 1835 poem Locksley Hall. The current building is early 18th century and made of brick, although it does have an earlier 17th century core. The house is of 2 storeys with a 9-bay entrance facade and 11 bays on the garden facade. The entrance hall had a ceiling painting attributed to Verrio that was destroyed by a fire in 1980. The current building was first occupied by the Wollastons, who acquired the manor of Lowesby from the Burdett and Ashby families who held it previously. Richard Wollaston was the first man to live here. He was a descendant of a junior branch of the Wollaston family, anciently from Staffordshire, who later settled at Shenton Hall, elsewhere in Leicestershire. He appears to have been a gun founder. Indeed, he was described in 1650 as a master gunner, and it's believed he was the man that created guns for none other than Oliver Cromwell. He certainly held a high position in the Ordnance Department and was also responsible to the Ordnance Commission. Lowesby's Wollaston line would end with Anne, who married into the Folk family in 1772. The Folk family was formerly seated at Gunston, again in Staffordshire. Anne Wollaston's husband was Lieutenant General Sir Thomas Folk, groom of the bedchamber to the Duke of Cumberland. Their son was Sir Frederick Gustavus Folk, who served as Provincial Grand Master of Leicestershire from 1850 to 1856 and as Senior Grand Warden for the United Grand Lodge of England in 1821. In his youth, he'd come into frequent contact with the Prince Regent and his royal brothers, the former giving him the quirky nickname Fred Fun. He was said to be the perfect country gentleman. He was a Tory politician and a member of the Pitt Club, and he also served as president of the Leicestershire Architectural and Archaeological Society. Several other Folk family members were residents of this hall, far too many to list them all. The property was eventually let by the family when they moved away to Upcott Farm at Bishop's Taunton in Devon. This was the perfect opportunity for many hunters. A lot of the Folk's tenants used the hall as a residence during the hunting season. The tenant in 1910 was Captain Harold Brassey. He was a polo champion and was later killed in action during World War I. His grandfather, Thomas Brassey, made a huge fortune as a railway engineer. It was Brassey who commissioned Edward Lutyens to alter and extend the hall and gardens. Not long after Brassey's time, Lowesby was the home of John Spencer Churchill, the 10th Duke of Marlborough, and in his time there was a tragic accident. In 1927 he hosted a house guest by the name of Lady Victoria Bullock, who was killed while hunting with the Quorn hounds from Hungerton, having caught her head on a low archway. Her body was returned to Lowesby Hall. Next came the Nuttall family in 1934. Among their number was Sir Nicholas Nuttall, a notable amateur jockey under national hunt rules, who twice won the Grand Military Gold Cup at Sandown Park on his own horse, Stalbridge Park. He held a famous party at Lowesby Hall in 1959 to celebrate the restoration of Verrio's painted ceiling. He would go on to become an important campaigner for marine conservation and founded the Bahamas Reef Environmental Educational Foundation. Lowesby Hall is now occupied by the Wilsons, primarily the property developer David Wilson. He was the head honcho of the house building company Wilson Bowden. In 2007, Wilson Bowden was sold to Barratt Developments for £2.2 billion, a sale which put a massive amount of money into the Wilson family coffers. David Wilson's fortune was estimated to be some £375 million in 2013. As one of the richest men in the UK, Wilson has put his wealth to good use. He's a significant philanthropist, and through his charity, the David Wilson Foundation, the man has been a leading donor to the University of Leicester's Heart Research Centre at Glenfield Hospital. The 4 shots of mine that survived were the only ones I felt comfortable to use because at that point, David Wilson himself came out to speak to me. We had quite a lengthy chat, and although he seemed a little annoyed at first, he gradually understood what was going on. In the end, he seemed happy, and I think we parted as friends. In fact, he was quite interested in the entire concept of TVI by the end of the chat. I got the impression he was willing to understand too, which only backs up what I've just told you about his philanthropic nature and his generosity with the charity and the hospital. I later spoke to his wife as I was walking back to the car afterwards, who also seemed to understand it all. The whole thing was one of the strangest, yet at the same time incredible encounters I'd ever had in my time doing this. They both said they wanted to see this video when it came out, so if any of the Wilsons are watching this right now, let me know what you think. Okay, so we are done with Lowesby, and now I need to drive away from the village because there's one final landmark that we haven't yet talked about, and that's the former Lowesby railway station. Finally, we have Lowesby railway station to have a look at. This was originally called Lowesby and was a station on the Great Northern Railway's Leicester branch line. In fact, it was the first station on the line to open in 1882. It was one of two that served Tilton on the Hill, a much bigger village to the south. The other one was Tilton Station. Now, for Tilton's villagers, travelling to Leicester, oddly, was easier and more convenient from Lowesby. There were several reasons why. Firstly, it was nearer by public footpath. Lowesby was only 1 mile away, but you had to walk over a mile to reach Tilton Station. Lowesby also had more stopping trains, and because the journey to Leicester was 2.5 miles shorter, it meant the fares were cheaper. Reflecting this, several commuter trains from Leicester terminated at Lowesby, although these were withdrawn in 1916 together with the ones that ran through to Peterborough. The station closed to regular traffic in 1953, although summer excursion trains to Skegness and Mablethorpe continued until the end of the 1962 season. To the east of the station was Marefield Junction. It's believed that the railways contributed heavily to the decline of the population of Lowesby, and it probably didn't help the numbers in other local villages either. We'll discover what happened to some of those at a later date perhaps. For now, we're done with Lowesby and this lovely run through High Leicestershire. There'll be plenty more soon, so come back and join me next time, whenever that may be. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.